Time. We never seem to have enough of it, but in a hidden corner of the old market district, there's a mysterious shop where anyone can buy more time for a price that goes far beyond mere money. When struggling artist Maya discovers Kronos and Company, she's drawn into a dark world where memories can be traded like currency, and the true cost of borrowed time is measured not in hours, but in pieces of one's soul. This is a story about the choices we make when desperation meets opportunity, and the profound truth that some bargains, once struck, can never truly be undone. Our tale begins on a cold autumn afternoon, where hope grows thin and time seems to slip away like leaves in the wind. Maya trudged past the antique shops and cafes of the old market district, her worn portfolio clutched against her chest. Another gallery rejection. 6 months of pouring her soul into canvases, and still nothing. The late autumn wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of rain and decay. When something caught her eye, a shop she'd never noticed before, wedged between a bookstore and a shuttered bakery. The sign above the door read Kronos and Company in faded gold letters. Through grimy windows she glimpsed an assortment of odd timepieces. Grandfather clocks, sundials, and hourglasses of every size. But it was the small card in the window that made her stop. Time bought and sold, fair trades guaranteed. A bell chimed softly as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The interior was dimly lit by gas lamps that cast dancing shadows across walls lined with thousands of ticking clocks, their rhythms overlapping in an otherworldly symphony. The air felt thick, almost syrupy, as if moving through memory itself. Welcome to Kronos and Company. The voice was deep and melodious, belonging to a tall man with silver hair, and eyes like aged copper pennies. He stood behind a carved mahogany counter, writing in a massive leather-bound ledger, with a fountain pen that gleamed in the lamplight. "I am Thaddeus. How may I help you today?" Maya approached the counter, drawn by something she couldn't name. "I'm just browsing." "Your sign, it's unusual. Time bought and sold?" Thaddeus smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for comfort. "Quite literal, I assure you. We deal in time. Minutes, hours, days. People trade what they don't want for what they need." He studied her face. "You're an artist. I can see it in your hands, paint beneath the nails, calluses from holding brushes." "Not a very successful one," Maya admitted, surprising herself with her candour. Thaddeus closed his ledger with a soft thump. "Let me guess. You have plenty of hours spent waiting tables, stocking shelves, or whatever mundane work pays your bills. But what you lack are hours of pure creativity, those golden moments when inspiration flows like honey." Maya's heart quickened. "You're saying I could trade one for the other?" "Precisely." Thaddeus withdrew a small hourglass from beneath the counter. The sand within shimmered with an impossible iridescence. 6 months of your routine work hours in exchange for 3 months of pure creative time. The rate is 2 to 1, quality over quantity. "But how would that even work?" Maya asked, even as her hand reached for the hourglass. "Time is more fluid than most realize," Thaddeus explained, his voice hypnotic. "We simply redistribute it. Those tedious hours will be condensed, leaving gaps for your art to flourish. You'll still accomplish your work, but the memories of doing it will fade, replaced by hours of artistic productivity. As if in a dream, Maya found herself nodding. Thaddeus opened his ledger again, pages rustling like autumn leaves. Your signature here, please, in ink. The fountain pen felt heavy in her hand. As Maya signed, she noticed other names in the ledger, dozens, perhaps hundreds. Some entries were fresh, others faded to near invisibility. In the corner of her eye she caught movement, an elderly man shuffling between the clocks, clutching a small velvet bag. "Ah, Mr. Chen," Thaddeus called out. "Back so soon?" The old man approached the counter, his eyes fever-bright. "I need more time. I'll trade. I'll trade my childhood memories." Ages 5 through 10. Happy times, worth something surely. Maya felt a chill despite the shop's stuffiness. But before she could speak, Thaddeus had already turned back to her, pressing the hourglass into her hands. "The transaction is complete. Use your new hours wisely, Miss Maya. They're borrowed, after all." She left the shop in a daze, the hourglass warm against her palm. That night Maya painted with a fury she'd never known, colours flowing from her brush like music. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and when dawn came, she had created 3 pieces that made her previous work look like student sketches. But something felt off. When she tried to remember her shift at the cafe earlier, the memories were blurry, insubstantial as smoke. And in the corner of her studio, just visible from the corner of her eye, she could swear the shadows were moving, ticking like countless invisible clocks. Maya told herself it was worth it. She had another showing in 2 weeks, and now she knew she could fill it with work that would finally make people stop and stare. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were haunted by Mr. Chen's desperate face and the whisper of pages, turning in Thaddeus's endless ledger. 3 weeks after her first visit to Kronos and Company, Maya's exhibition was a resounding success. Critics praised the raw emotional depth and startling evolution of her work. She sold every piece, earning enough to quit her cafe job. Yet as she celebrated with champagne, the gaps in her memory had grown larger, darker. She found herself back at the shop almost daily, drawn by an unsettling compulsion to observe other customers. They came in all types, students trading weekend parties for study time, executives bartering family dinners for productive hours, writers exchanging sleep for creativity. But it was the regulars who troubled her most. Mr. Chen had aged decades in mere weeks. His once black hair had turned completely white, and his hands trembled constantly. A woman Maya recognized as a former customer who had traded her commute time for more hours with her children, now walked past her own kids without recognizing them, her eyes glazed and distant. "The body remembers what the mind forgets," a voice said behind her. Maya turned to find a young woman with prematurely grey hair studying her. "I'm Dr. Sarah Wells, or I was, before I traded my residency years for time to care for my dying mother." "What do you mean the body remembers?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Haven't you noticed? The traded time doesn't just disappear. It fractures, creates paradoxes. Your body still experiences those hours you sold, but your mind can't process them properly. The human psyche isn't meant to handle temporal displacement. Maya thought of her own forgotten hours, the increasing moments where she'd find herself somewhere without remembering how she got there. But Mr. Thaddeus said— Mr. Thaddeus, Sarah interrupted, isn't what he seems. None of this is what it seems. Watch him sometime. When he thinks no one's looking, watch how he feeds. That night, Maya stayed hidden behind a tall grandfather clock after the shop's official closing time. As the last customer left, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Mr. Thaddeus opened his ledger and bent over it, inhaling deeply. His form seemed to ripple, becoming something ancient and hungry, drawing sustenance from the pages themselves. The ledger glowed with a sickly light, and within its pages Maya could hear the whispers of thousands of fractured timelines, crying out in confusion and loss. She must have made some small sound because suddenly Thaddeus looked up. His eyes were no longer copper but bottomless black, reflecting the endless tick of eternal clocks. Ah, Miss Maya. I wondered when curiosity would get the better of you. What are you? She whispered. I'm a collector of moments, a curator of hours. His smile was terrible to behold. Every paradox you humans create, every temporal fracture, they're like the finest wine to my kind. We feed on the dissonance, the sweet agony of memories trying to reconcile what never was with what must have been. Maya backed away, but her legs felt heavy, unresponsive. The others, Mr. Chen, the commuter mother, acceptable losses. They knew the price, even if they didn't understand it. Just as you did. He gestured to a mirror on the wall, and Maya gasped. Her reflection showed a woman with strands of silver in her dark hair, fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. Time always demands balance, Miss Maya. Always demands its due. She fled into the night, but she could still hear the whispers from the ledger, could feel the pull of all those fractured hours. And worse, she could feel her own traded time calling to her, a void in her life that grew hungrier with each passing day. As she ran, she realized with horror that she no longer remembered her mother's face, her father's voice, memories that had occurred during hours she'd carelessly traded away. Behind her, the shop's windows glowed with that sickly light, and the sound of turning pages echoed through the empty streets like the beating of dark wings. Maya spent the next week watching the shop from a distance, gathering fragments of information between the growing holes in her memory. She observed dozens of customers entering bright-eyed with hope and leaving with that same haunted look she now saw in her own reflection. The windows of Kronos and Company pulsed with a subtle glow that only she and other time traders seemed to notice. She found Sarah again, now barely recognizable, aged well beyond her years. The ledger, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. It's his anchor to this reality. Every transaction, every fractured timeline is recorded there. It's what gives him power over the hours we've traded. Then we destroy it, Maya said simply. Sarah's laugh turned into a cough. Impossible. You've seen what he is. We're nothing to him, just cattle to be fed upon. Everyone who's tried to stop him has failed. They tried alone. Maya pulled out her sketchbook, showing Sarah the drawings she'd made of the shop, of Thaddeus, of the ledger itself. Her artist's eye had captured details others might miss, the way reality seemed to bend around the shop's corners, the patterns of temporal energy that flowed into the ledger. and they didn't have my borrowed hours of creativity. The plan came together over sleepless nights filled with research and preparation. Maya gathered other time traders, each broken in their own way but desperate for redemption. Mr. Chen, with his fractured memories. The commuter mother, who could now barely remember her own name. Even some of Thaddeus's newest victims, who still retained enough of themselves to understand what was happening. On a moonless night, they put their plan into action. Maya entered the shop alone, carrying her portfolio. "Mr. Thaddeus," she called out, "I'd like to make one final trade." He emerged from the shadows, eyes glinting with hunger. "And what would you offer?" "Everything." Maya met his gaze steadily. "My entire future. Every hour from this moment until what would have been my natural death." Thaddeus's form rippled with excitement. An extraordinary offer. But why? "Because without my past, my future means nothing, and I've lost too much of who I was. At least this way, the trade has meaning." As Thaddeus opened the ledger, Maya revealed her true offer, her artist's understanding of creation and destruction, the power of making and unmaking. She had learned that time itself was a kind of art, and like any art, it could be reshaped by one who understood its fundamental nature. The others burst in, each carrying mirrors they'd prepared according to Maya's specifications. The reflected light caught the temporal energy flowing through the shop, making it visible, tangible. Maya grabbed the ledger, her hands burning where they touched it, and began to tear out pages even as they tried to heal themselves. "Fool," Thaddeus's voice shook the foundations of reality itself. "You'll destroy everything, all of time will unravel." "No," Maya gasped through the pain. "Just your hold on it." She had realized the truth. The ledger didn't just record time trades. It contained the original timeline, the true flow of hours that should have been. As she destroyed the corrupted pages, that natural flow began to reassert itself. Thaddeus lunged for her, his form now completely inhuman, but he was caught in the web of reflected temporal energy. Maya saw his true nature then, not a dealer in time, but a parasite feeding on human desperation, on the paradoxes created by their impossible trades. With a final surge of strength, Maya thrust the ledger into the heart of the temporal web. Reality itself seemed to scream as thousands of fractured timelines suddenly snapped back into place. The shop's walls began to dissolve, revealing the void beyond. "You don't understand what you've done," Thaddeus howled, as his form began to fade. "The cost." "I understand perfectly," Maya replied. "Everything has its price. Even time." The world turned inside out, and Maya felt herself falling through an infinity of restored moments. She saw Mr. Chen playing with his grandchildren, his memories intact. The commuter mother hugging her children with clear recognition in her eyes. Sarah, young again, saving lives in her hospital. When reality settled, Maya found herself back in her studio. Her paintings, created with borrowed time, were gone. But her memories had returned, her mother's smile, her father's laugh, every precious moment she'd traded away. Her hair was dark again, her face young, but her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen the true value of time. On her easel sat a blank canvas, waiting. Maya picked up her brush, ready to create something new, not with borrowed hours, but with the honest time she'd been given. Outside, the morning sun rose over the old market district, where no one remembered a shop called Kronos and Company, and time flowed as it always had, one precious moment after another.